Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. The reports from the first wave of Trump's ICE raids are full of disturbing stories of jackbooted thugs oppressing the oppressed and literally tearing families apart in the name of a fascist, xenophobic, and factually inaccurate agenda. Trump's long-promised mass deportations have begun, ramping up from the Obama administration's already disgusting record of nearly 3 million deportations. As more and more people find themselves in the crosshairs of fascism, it is quite clear that those of us lower on that checklist, because we are all on it, have an obligation to stand up, to demand our communities and cities be safe havens for all, sanctuary cities, if you will, and to be ready to put our bodies on the front lines for freedom, justice, and human rights. The concept of a sanctuary city actually dates back to the Old Testament and early Christian rulers who designated certain cities as places of sanctuary for those accused of accidentally committing manslaughter. 2,000 years later, and we've entered into the bizarro world of 2017, where people who call themselves the followers of Christ have turned sanctuary into a dirty word and back a crackdown on the undocumented, literally among the most vulnerable people around. Of course, these are the same Republicans who call themselves pro-life while destroying the social safety net that ensures children, not to mention their parents on whom their lives depend, have access to health care and at least 3 square meals a day. But honestly, if I were to dive into the hypocrisy of establishment politicians, we'd be here all day. So, the actual effects of sanctuary programs vary from place to place, but a sanctuary city often means that police are instructed not to participate with immigration's officials' deportation orders unless the immigrant is charged with a criminal offense. Other places, like Austin, Texas, have created legal defense funds for immigrants, or simply instituted policies that make it clear that everyone should benefit from social services like food stamps, regardless of their immigration status. And indeed, here in D.C., activists last week called for the removal of all ICE agents from the district and demanded that D.C. City Council ignore all ICE requests, as well as take real steps to stop police violence and the discrimination against immigrants, Muslims, and people of color. You know, just because human rights belong to all humans, regardless of where you happen to have been born, who or if you pray to anyone, or what color your skin is. A human being cannot actually be illegal. Although the state has done its damnedest to commodify us, we are not contraband. We are humans, and no one is illegal. Back to sanctuary cities, Trump and his old white murder of cronies are threatening to cut off state and government funding to any community that institutes sanctuary policies. In the Texas legislature, which we covered in episode 92, if you want to go back and look at that mess, there's a bill being considered which could actually remove elected officials from office if they protect the undocumented. Yeah, you heard that right. Voters be damned. If you're too nice to refugees and immigrants, we'll find someone else to do your job of representing people, white people, rich white people, and not the female ones. On February 12th, Trump tweeted, "The crackdown on illegal criminals is merely the keeping of my campaign promise. Gang members, drug dealers, and others are being removed." However, the reality of Trump keeping his promise looks a lot different on the ground. While it's true that former President Obama, once known as the deporter-in-chief for his record-breaking number of deportations, helped create the conditions under which Trump's crackdown could thrive, there's absolutely no denying that things have escalated. Around the country, immigrants are being unexpectedly deported when they report for routine check-ins with immigration officials. Agents are going door to door, ambushing parents after school, entering Latinx nightclubs, and even demanding proof of citizenship on public transit. In Alexandria, Virginia, ICE officials ambushed immigrants as they exited a church-based homeless shelter where they had taken refuge from freezing temperatures. And in El Paso, Texas, ICE detained a transgender Mexican woman last week inside of a courthouse while she sought a restraining order against her abusive boyfriend. The agents even acted based on a tip from the abusive boyfriend himself. As El Paso County Attorney Joanne Bernal told The Washington Post, this is really unprecedented. It was the first time in her 23 years at the courthouse, Bernal said, that she can remember ICE agents making their presence known during a protective order hearing. In another case, ICE detained Daniel Ramirez Medina, an undocumented immigrant twice authorized to stay in the United States under Obama's DACA program. As reported by United We Dream, the immigrant-led youth organization, quote, ICE is pressuring him to say that he's in a gang. He's not. He has random tattoos on his arm. But as we all know, arm tattoos are only worn by gang members. The catch, of course, is that if they can say that he's in a gang, they can deport him much easier. So in his original statement, Ramirez Medina wrote, I came in and the officers said I have gang affiliation with gangs, so I wear an orange uniform. I do not have a criminal history and I am not affiliated with any gangs. But the paperwork that ICE later filed had been altered to make his first sentence read, I have gang affiliation with gangs, so I wear an orange uniform. I guess these fucking evil idiots just hoped that no one would notice the ridiculously sloppy job with the whiteout, or that the second half of his altered statement now totally contradicts the first. And the fucked up thing is that they probably didn't even need to waste the whiteout. At a February 16th meeting on Capitol Hill between Congress and immigration officials, ICE officials acknowledged that at least 186 of those apprehended in recent days had no criminal history. In the same meeting, officials also admitted that the raids reflected a dramatic escalation even from Obama's policies of deportation, and that ICE would be asking for a dramatically increased budget. Meanwhile, members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus were actually turned away from the meeting. I guess we should all just be thankful that they're still in the country, that they weren't just loaded onto buses and shipped away. What about all the rest? The undocumented immigrants with criminal histories that are being swept up in these raids. Unfortunately, while it can take years and cost thousands of dollars to become a naturalized American citizen, becoming a victim of the police state and the prison industrial complex takes a lot less time. In places like New York, supposedly a sanctuary city, low-level offenses like unpaid parking tickets and crossing against a stoplight can easily land an immigrant in the notorious Rikers Island jail and from there into the hands of ICE. And New York isn't alone. In Phoenix, Arizona, the infamous Sheriff Arpaio routinely had his officers conduct broad sweeps of Latinx neighborhoods, arresting or detaining anyone that looked like they might be here illegally. Suspected illegals were then dumped into what Arpaio himself proudly called his concentration camps. And yes, that included forced labor. These huge detention centers spilled out into makeshift tent cities, blistering human rights violations that baked in the Arizona sun and still could never keep up with Arpaio's ever-growing demand for bodies. And one of those bodies was recently deported longtime U.S. resident and mother of 2 U.S.-born children, Guadalupe Garcia de Reyes, who in 2008 was arrested and charged during one of Arpaio's routine and V for Vendetta-esque night raids. Her arrest, charge, and 6-month incarceration are what landed her in the new crosshairs of Trump's January 25th executive order that now seeks to deport anyone convicted of a criminal offense. So what was her heinous crime? Criminal impersonation, or in layman's terms, obtaining false identification in the form of a social security card so that she could work. She spent 6 months in jail, had to check in with ICE every year for 8 years, which she did because she wanted to be a part of the fucking economy. She dared to be a non-lazy immigrant. She said that she came here for a better life because she wanted to build something. Wait, I think I've heard of this. Oh yeah, the fucking American dream. Not only that, but she wanted to eat and survive And who the fuck watching this would not impersonate anyone from Big Bird to Margaret Thatcher if that meant feeding your kids? In short, far from targeting gang members and drug dealers, the vast majority of people caught up in raids are just regular poor people trying to make ends meet until payday. Ultimately, with the cops actively seeking to criminalize immigrants, even in sanctuary cities, we can't depend on the name of sanctuary city to keep immigrants, the undocumented, and refugees safe. As usual, it's going to depend on resistance from the likes of you and me. This time, however, holding up clever protest signs is not going to cut it. A report by the Associated Press last Friday highlights Section D of the January 25th memorandum titled Implementing the President's Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Improvements Policies. Section D of this memorandum is titled Expansion of the 287G program to include state guard units in the border region. Written by Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, John Kelly, supposedly, it reads, I am directing the Commissioner of CBP and the Director of ICE to immediately engage with the governors of the states adjacent to the land border with Mexico for the purpose of entering into agreements to authorize qualified members of the State National Guard to perform the function of an immigration officer in relation to the investigation, apprehension, and detention of aliens in the United States. Now, since its release Friday morning, the establishment has pushed back against these claims, saying that the memo was in fact a draft memo, not even written by John Kelly himself necessarily, so it's not like official or anything. The DHS and everyone's favorite press secretary, Sean Spicer, have staunchly denied the claim that the National Guard will in fact be mobilized for the purpose of anti-immigration raids. So we all feel better, don't we? Fuck that. Even if it isn't implemented, the fact that a member of the president's cabinet felt that this was a totally legit memo to even think, let alone write, is more than enough of a window into the policies of this administration. If you were looking for a written invitation, this is it. In immigrant communities nationwide, activists are already mobilizing to defend their communities, as the massively successful Day Without Immigrants strike demonstrated. But they need our help, especially those of us privileged to have been born here with citizenship. And again, even more so those that look like me. Check your privilege and use it, because it's going to take all of us. And we're going to have to be willing to do more than protest. We must be willing to record and report immigration raids when we see them, to block ICE officials with our bodies, and to hide immigrants and refugees in our homes, our places of worship, and our jobs. As James Baldwin beautifully and hauntingly wrote in a letter to Angela Davis in 1970 when she was in jail, some of us, white and black, know how great a price has already been paid to bring into existence a new consciousness, a new people, an unprecedented nation. If we know and we do nothing, we are worse than the murderers hired in our name. If we know, then we must fight for your life as though it were our own, which it is, and render impassable with our bodies the corridor to the gas chamber, for if they take you in the morning, they will be coming for us that night. And although Baldwin was speaking specifically about the struggle for Black power and equality in the states, this message holds true for all of the oppressed and for all of us who must be those bodies in the corridor. We are all implicated. So reach out to your local immigrants' rights groups and ask how you can help. And I do stress the word local here. Big organizations often do not have the necessary understanding or connection with people on the ground to facilitate rapid and real help. A good place to start would be to see who organized or helped to organize the local Day Without Immigrants in your area last Thursday, or talk to local businesses that were closed in solidarity. And again, if you look like me, if you're a citizen of this empire, you have an obligation to stand up against these human rights abuses. You have an obligation to be in that corridor. You are either complicit in your silence, a passive pawn for violence, or you are on the front lines against fascism, against hate, against bigotry, against apathy. Which side are you on?